Welcome to the RevOps Co-op video interviews. I am your interviewer, Kamala Thompson, and today I'm interviewing Ken Kramer. Ken, tell us a little bit about your background and why we're talking territories.
My name's Ken Kramer. I have been working with territory optimization software on and off since the mid 90s, I believe. Just to date myself, uh, I have launched products embedding territory optimization algorithms into mapping software. I have launched, I've brought those products to market when sales ops really wasn't necessarily uh, a job or a role or a title or department within most companies, no less RevOps. So this dates back a little ways, but it is something I have worked on, as I said, on and off over the last 30 years. And I've run sales organizations, I've run marketing organizations, predominantly in companies selling sales optimization software of some sort.
I think a lot of our listeners are in the technology sector and things look a bit different, and we've lost sight of some of the practices that I saw as best practices back when we were restricted by coverage and how well somebody could maneuver within a given geography. So,
Right.
if we can maybe talk a little bit about the evolution of territories, I think that would be really interesting.
Ironically, solutions like those that do the territory optimization for companies were initially founded back in the 90s, and they were both on the behalf of large pharmaceutical companies. And the reason I say it's ironic is because pharmaceutical reps were the only reps that don't actually sell anything. They market a product, but they're not typically selling the solution. They're encouraging the doctors to write scripts for their products. That was the first vertical that embraced the optimization of the resources that they had to do their job. They knew and did a lot of other work and math to determine how many times a rep should go visit a doctor to help move the needle on how many prescriptions were going to get written. And it really became a capacity issue. If we have, um, thousands of doctors, we know their locations, we know we want to visit this segment um, 3 times a quarter, and we want to visit that segment 6 times a quarter. And we know visits are 30 minutes, 15 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever it may be, depending on the product line. Then you simply need, not simply, but you need to incorporate the drive time aspect into things to be able to maximize the capacity of each sales rep so that they're spending more time selling or promoting those products instead of driving uh, from one doctor or client to another. Um, I believe the evolution of this into other verticals spread when pharmaceutical companies were limited on how much money a rep could spend on a doctor, taking them out, and they actually had to focus on only the work that they were doing as opposed to the golf game that they were playing. And those sales forces started to shrink. So the number of sales reps that were employed in the pharmaceutical industry shrank significantly because the reps were more productive in their day-to-day job as opposed to being allowed to pay for a round of golf because it was above $25. Many of those sales reps from the pharmaceutical industry moved into medical products. It was a natural transition. And the medical products industry vertical and consumer packaged goods verticals really operate in very similar manners, and they actually do care about the capacity of those reps. What's the least number of reps we can have, make the most number of sales calls, and manage the accounts that exist to be able to maximize our investment in our entire sales force. So it's a big math problem focused around capacity. When I started doing this in the 90s, the number of software companies that were bigger than $100 million was nominal. And therefore, the number of sales reps that they employed was relatively small, and the number of outside sales reps they employed was smaller. Thankfully, for all of us who work in tech, um, software companies have done well over the years. But the reality is the number of sales reps employed in the software industry is still less than many other industries. So while some of the tech companies did embrace additional technologies like territory optimization, incentive comp, and other things around making sales forces more effective, they often had smaller groups to do so, and we started seeing more and more inside sales teams, as opposed to the outside sales teams. And the variables that they cared about in tech were different than in CPG, med products, and pharma, where it was all about workload or capacity of a sales rep. In tech, for lack of better words, nobody cared how much a sales rep worked as long as they brought in $1 million or $2 million or whatever their quota was. So it was heavily focused on opportunity.
If we could talk a bit about, I think a lot of this math is in place to prevent the land grab, which we're both very
So,
familiar with.
so I have some great stories about that. Learning ones, experiences that I've remembered is, um, so, and I'll tell you some of the companies I have worked for. Mostly, I've been in the software side of the world my entire life. I did spend a long time at a company called Teraline, who was one of those two first companies that did this. And we did a significant amount of consulting as well. And now, after being, going through the typical changes, acquisitions, and things that have happened over the time, I ended up with a consulting organization myself, and I partner with other folks for some of the software. But when I've worked on some of those early consulting projects, it was the first time in my life where I sat in a room with field managers. Typically, the consulting engagement would the last step would typically be a field session where we would get the buy-in from the field managers, allow them to tweak and change, add some of their local knowledge in. And this would help for multiple reasons. You get slightly better results, but more importantly, you get buy-in from the field managers who can then explain it to the sales reps on why they should recognize this is goodness and nobody's out to screw you and ruin your territory or take all your good accounts. But if you don't have that at the field manager level, you're going to have issues at the rep level when you roll out the new comp plans, quotas, and territories, and at the sales kickoff. So I'm glad you had brought up quotas as well. And just for a smidge more background on myself, when I wasn't involved with territory alignment and optimization software over the last 30 years, I probably spent a good 6 years in the sales comp space as well. So fortunately, I feel as though having the experience I had already from the territory side, when I got to the sales comp side, I'm like, oh, this all goes together. Like territories, comp, and quota go together. And it was after the fact that I started pitching some of that to the analysts. Did sales performance management start to become a term, and did they start grouping a lot of these things together? And it just makes sense. So my perspective is you should set quotas after you set territories, especially in the non-tech world. In the tech world, maybe, you might be able to put the same amount of opportunity in every territory, especially if they're inside reps and they're not traveling. Then you focus the balancing solely on the opportunity, and then everybody can have the same opportunity. Therefore, everybody can have the same quota. In the outside sales rep world, somebody in northern New Jersey is going to have more accounts closer together than somebody in Montana. And that could lead me to the white space discussion right away, because you might discover, hey, look, a fair and equitable territory is something that has 35 hours, 32 hours worth of work on average per week for the entire year. That takes into account vacation time, sick time, training time, whatever it is. So most of our clients historically always looked in that 32, 33 hours per week on average for the year. When you take into account drive time, somebody in Montana could have 35 hours, 32, 33 hours worth of work a week and only see 2 clients. Somebody in New Jersey is going to have 30 clients that they see within that time. They're going to make their 6 calls a day or whatever it may be. Therefore, there's 2 things you really need to consider. One, their quotas shouldn't be the same. 2, if somebody in Montana only has the ability to see 2 clients, should that be a field territory or should it be a territory at all? And at that point in time, you really have to make a bigger decision on this isn't profitable business for us to have, or we need to outsource it to another company, perhaps a distributor, to be able to deal with it, or deal with it from an inside sales perspective and try to make it profitable again.
Yeah.
So
We
we certainly do see companies building around metro areas. One of the other things, though, that when you talk about less mature companies and less of a market presence in certain geographies, in many cases, I might say companies like that, if they're in that earlier stage and still growing, in all likelihood, all of their reps are at full capacity.
Mhm.
So if you're at full capacity, you have 6, 10, 20 reps spread across the whole country. One of them might be at 400% capacity, another one at 100% capacity. But the reality is who cares?
Yeah.
Because you're at 100% capacity. If you simply can't accomplish anymore and bring in any more business, you're maxed out. Now you might look at the one saying, well, we got 400% capacity in New Jersey. Let's split it and create 3 or 4 territories out of it. And then you're good to go. And that's how companies should be growing and looking at things. But simply going through a rebalancing effort to give everybody in the company 200% capacity isn't going to get you anything in the long run, because once you're at 100%, you're at 100%.
I think it's also important. This will never just be an account density exercise, or shouldn't be. You should be getting feedback from your reps and developing a more refined profile of what works and what doesn't. So, for example, we learned pretty quickly that it just wasn't efficient or effective to put reps in areas like Montana, not just because of the drive time, but because this was the early 2000s. We were selling digital marketing services, and it was more effective for a dealership in the middle of Montana to sponsor their local little league and have signs up than it was for them to be blasting all over the internet, because just country mentality plus other things. And I think, you look at an example like laser weeding technology, which is a thing. They're not going to be selling that in big metro areas, obviously. It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, look, I don't think territory design, territory optimization is the only thing every organization should be doing.
Right.
It's a critical piece.
Yep.
In much of our consulting that we've done segmentation exercises first. So
Mhm.
let's determine what the ideal customer looks like. Let's go through that ICP process. Let's then say, all right, a company this size and with these attributes has the potential of X. So now you can start to build in some potential opportunity and assign them to accounts and prospects. And then you can say, well, a company like that should be worth $1 million to us. We're already getting $1 million out of them. So you can't necessarily expect the same level of growth
Right.
until you start to dig in deeper on every individual account. And sometimes you do want to exclude accounts. You get somebody with a territory and you talk about the automotive industry, maybe they're selling to the manufacturers, or parts makers or whatnot. And you have somebody who owns Ford as their account. And by all the numbers, they should have a quota of 10 times bigger than everybody else. But the reality is Ford has an exclusive agreement with X, Y, and Z competitor, and you have zero opportunity. So you need to, yes, you do need to recognize the market circumstances and understand who you're selling to, your customers, your prospects. Um, but that's where a lot of times that field knowledge comes in. First there's a lot of math, and that gets you close, and then you bring in some of those extra layers as well. But yeah, segmentation, we've looked at uh, um, after segmentation and the targeting, who you think you should be calling on and what their value is, how often you should be calling on them, reach and frequency. Um, and that helps lead to the sizing side of things. How many reps do I need if I'm going to make to segment A, if I'm going to make one call a month for 30 minutes, segment B, I'm going to make one call every 3 months for 60 minutes. Then you start having that math to then determine how many reps you need to be able to service that number of accounts appropriately. And then is really where the territory design and optimization come in and recognize some benefits and shave 5-10% off of that sizing number, perhaps, as you go through the exercise and really zero in on the accounts you should be servicing and locating them appropriately so a rep can see more of them at the same time. And when I talk about optimization, it's not just analysis, it's an algorithm that actually tells you what the best mathematical solution is. I would usually look at that as being a 95% solution because I do expect users to tweak and change afterwards based upon local knowledge. However, from a straight up math perspective, those analytics tools don't do what territory optimization tools that have optimization built into it actually do and give you the best possible solution. And this is, again, I'm going to say, I'll preempt the AI speak because all these solutions have been doing this for years, did it with algorithms, not with AI. AI, I firmly believe, has a place and will have a place. But everything that's intelligent and smart and has algorithms is not AI in my book. After the territory design side of things, you should then work on the call planning side of things. Territory optimization should yield between 4 and 12% gain in efficiencies. You have the ability with route optimization to take it another 5-10% beyond that on a day-to-day execution side of things. I look at the territory design really as a planning side. I look at the route optimization as an execution side of things. And for a rep to be able to, first off, start with a good territory and then handle whatever obstacles are thrown their way. They wake up Monday morning, they got their route, they got the, 7 accounts they're going to go see today, and somebody calls and says, I got to cancel. You don't just blow it off. Find your next closest account that you can go see or a prospect that you can go see and optimize the route accordingly or re-optimize the route accordingly so that they can make use of their time as opposed to just hitting the golf range or having a longer lunch.
Yeah, and I think the equivalent to that I've seen in tech is probably account planning, and that's really optimization by segmentation and profile and what other
Yeah,
product sets they already have versus upsells. But instead of going in that direction, I want to go back to a place that you mentioned earlier that I thought was super, super smart, and how intertwined territory planning and compensation planning have to be. I think you have some great best practices around here that I'd love to talk about.
sure. So, so I'll run through some of the best practices that we've mentioned in the past, and I'll try to tie it into some of the compensation side of things. But um, when I spent time in the incentive comp world, they were all focused on really on the comp design, creating plans that would influence the rep to do what you wanted them to do. And I found it kind of interesting, and I had to bite my lip a lot because the comp design was typically done by consultants, and the software would simply calculate, not to demean what these calculation engines do because they're powerful and they save companies tons of money by not having errors. So I know that, we had always wanted to sell to sales and sales ops and on the strategic side of things about the benefit of good comp design and impacting the focus of a rep. But the reality was it was really the CFO that would buy it because it would eliminate the errors and the manpower needed to be able to make commission payments on a regular basis. And the more frequently you can make commission payments, the more in tune with a rep's action and reward they are. So then they will, you're getting the right benefit from the comp plan that you want. If you pay somebody on a quarterly basis, they've long forgotten what they sold in the first month of the quarter. If you pay them on a monthly basis, and this is where, I credit guys like Mark Benioff and Salesforce that really push that. You're getting paid every month. You have a quota every month. You have, and there's a lot of benefit to that. So I looked at things, and we had always talked about comp plans being aligned to corporate strategies. I totally agree with it. You need to understand what that corporate strategy is and then use some of the same variables and elements that go into the comp plan into the variables and elements that go into the territory design. So what are you going to balance on? If you're paying people to sell X, Y, and Z, well, something associated with X, Y, and Z better be part of the calculation for the territory design side. And then again, I think I'd already mentioned the quota piece of it. Quotas come after those things. I always looked at kind of the territories and the compensation design. Those things need to go in parallel with each other and make sure they're consistent. After you design the territories, you should be setting the quotas. And in most cases, especially outside of technology, anybody that is focused on capacity of the sales force and on workload, design the territories based upon workload, set the quotas based upon the opportunity that then exists. And then that might lead to that white space discussion that we talked about.
Well, and I would say technology companies should focus, and I've seen people learn the hard way in technology where they're just focused on opportunity and they're not layering in capacity, opportunity, and then market knowledge. So, and they're not adjusting quotas appropriately. So, as an example, I worked with a software company that did a lot of targeted advertising in Denver West and then along the East Coast. And then they stuck somebody in the Southeast. And is it a surprise to anyone that they struggled like crazy to get their foothold there? It shouldn't have been. Unfortunately, it was. But yeah,
that's a bigger go-to-market
well, it was. Yes, it was a bigger go-to-market
breakdown.
issue. Yeah. But I think not taking into account capacity, opportunity, and market conditions is just when you're designing quotas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is just a big mistake.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I would just say that in general, if workload is a component, not every territory should have the same quota. Yep.
So maybe we talk a bit more about those best practices, and then we can move into how they should still apply no matter how you're thinking about territories.
I'm going to give a shout out to there's a guy named Joe Galvin who was one of the first analysts to cover the sales ops space working for Gartner way back when, probably in the 90s, early 2000s. And he had been a VP of sales, he had been VP of sales operations, and he became an analyst, largely talking about this. And as I had come from territory optimization and now working for an incentive comp company, we hit it off quite well. He is also about 7 feet tall, as a fun fact for people to know. And he's a fantastic gentleman. If anybody wants to read any of his old research, he's I think more focused on the SMB world now than this, but great guy. And he talked about the command central and the three-legged stool, and these were some of the terms he applied to this. But this talks about somebody coming into the sales kickoff, January or whatever point in the year that you're doing your sales kickoff, and a sales rep, other than the boondoggle and the camaraderie and the fun and potential alcohol that goes along with the sales kickoff and the entertainment and hopefully a good concert, all they really care about when they leave is what's my comp plan, what's my quota, what's my territory. That's what it boils down to. Those are the critical factors. Yeah, they need to learn about new products. They need to know how to sell those products, but none of that matters until they know what their territory is and how they're going to get paid and what they're expected to perform. So that's, why I get into it with the three-legged stool. For those three core components, they do go hand in hand together without a doubt. And I have done on the territory side of the world, I have done partnerships with compensation vendors in the past as well, because we all get where this is all supposed to feed to. I do have another pretty graphic for you to talk about balance. And I actually really like this. This isn't just a pretty soothing kind of picture, with the ocean and the rocks, but the cool thing about this is you have a big rock on one side and four small rocks, and everything's nice and balanced. Not every account is equal, is really what this is saying. That's, and you can create an equitable territory with a very different mix of accounts and still end up with the bottom line being approximately the same, giving each of the reps the right amount of workload or the right opportunity in their territory. So it goes a little bit further, and we talk about some of the things that go into what designs a good territory. And it's really all about, again, that capacity is if you give somebody too many accounts, what typically happens, and I'll tie this back to compensation because somewhere in my world I have a graph that shows the negative impacts of reality in the sales world. You'll have a sales rep that's really good, where everybody thinks the sales rep is really good, and the sales manager is afraid to change their territory. And then what happens is they end up with a big overloaded territory, and year over year over year, they blow out their number. And it's
Every time.
because, and
Every
and
time.
it's wow, what a great rep, what a rock star. The reality is, in many cases, they might be a good rep, but the reality is they're overloaded. They cherry pick the best possible opportunities that are going to close the fastest with the least amount of work and make them the most amount of money, especially if the comp plan is doing what it's supposed to do along with this overloaded territory. They're driving them to close the business that makes them the most amount of money. It's great, except for the fact, and you'll see this in the pharma industry more than anybody else. One of the calculations the pharma industry does for their sales reps is they measure the market share by territory, by product, by rep. So they know they might have a rep that exceeded quota, but they only have 20% market share. And if that's the case, that means in all likelihood, the territory was poorly designed. They're
Yep.
losing to their competitors.
Yep.
They're costing you money, especially in other industries, maybe in pharma too. They're costing you money because you're now paying accelerators because they're blowing out their number and losing market share all at the same time.
I see this a lot in tech.
Oh,
And
yeah.
a quick way to figure this out is to look at your highly target accounts, high fit, and that saturation in any given territory, volume and
Yeah.
saturation. So we run into the same thing where we change somebody's territory. Oh, I need to keep these 50 accounts because I have established relationships there.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Right.
Sure.
How many did they sell into? Maybe 3 or
20.
4 if you're lucky.
3 or 4. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I had long before I was even involved with this, a friend of mine, um, one of my old high school friends, a woman, rock star salesperson. She's killed it everywhere she's gone forever and ever. But 30 years ago, you know, I think she skipped college, went to work and started making money. And I get out of school and I have crappy sales jobs and whatever I can do to make money. And she explains to me that she just had this great year, but she also explains to me, I'm gonna have, if I stay here, I'm gonna have a good year every other year and a bad year every other year because they look at her quota and actually they set her quota based upon how she performed last year. So if she blows out her number, they're going to jack up her quota, whether the opportunity exists or not. And then she'll miss her number. And then they'll readjust the quota the following year because she missed her quota. So they'll say, all right, it must have been too high, so we'll set it lower. And then she'll blow it out again. Whereas the reality is you got to not look at the performance of the rep necessarily, but look at the opportunity that actually exists within the territory. These were life lessons that I've taken with me and picked up along the way in different places, but it all comes back to you really need equitable territories, especially if you want to measure, that rock star sales rep who blew out their number quarter after quarter, year after year, and lost you market share. If you really want to measure who's good and who's not good, you need an equitable starting point.
Yeah, and that drove me crazy in tech where they give somebody Orlando and then somebody the Northern Territories. I don't care how bad the rep in Orlando is, they're just probably going to do better just based on
Yeah.
opportunity alone.
Yeah, there's only so many alligators that'll buy from you north of Orlando.
Well, I'm at Northern Territories, Canada to make it even
Oh,
worse.
okay.
Like,
Yeah,
are you
yeah,
selling to moose?
yeah, exactly. Yes. So one other thing I do have on here is I do have a formula that we've used forever and ever to talk about workload. I think this is critical. These are things that people can look at and do, whether you have software or not. You could pull this off with spreadsheets. You can do a lot of these calculations, at least start to figure out if you're heading in the right direction. Obviously, a good software package will make your life easier. It'll save you a ton of time and it'll produce better results. The first product I launched doing territory optimization, I actually had OEM technology from Terraline, who I ended up working for later in life. And then I embedded it inside of MapInfo, which at the time was one of the two leading desktop GIS mapping applications out there to create a specific solution for sales managers and at the time there was almost no sales ops people to sell to. So, but it was whoever was doing the designing those territories. And when I launched it internally, I had our sales manager who obviously was adept at using MapInfo, which had redistricting capabilities built into the product right out of the box, but no optimization algorithms. So he had the ability to drag and drop and to move things from one territory to another. I said, all right, I forget what number, here's something, here's a bunch of data, create 10 territories evenly balanced, go. And he starts moving things around, using the application the way it's supposed to be used, but doing it essentially manually, but with a better tool than Excel. And I push a button, I put in my 3 variables and I push a button and I'm done. Not only am I done 10 or 100 times quicker than he is, but I also got better results because algorithms are smarter than people, for lack of a better word.
Humans. We
Yeah,
always mess things up.
we
Yeah.
ruin everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
First off, the computers, the algorithms, they'll get you 95% of the way there. We've often said a territory with that's 90% balanced is good, and one that's 95 is great. You're not getting to 100 in most cases. It's not going to be perfect. These are things to get you close, to get you in better situations. And every time a sales rep says, hey, look, I have Ford in my territory and they have an exclusive with our competitor, you got to pull that out. They might be right. And you either pull it out, or two, you look and recognize that every territory has one of those. So,
Yeah.
so So usually if there's one exception, there's more than one. And again, this will get you 90% of the way there, kind of thing. One thing to note, the last bullet I put in here is, to some extent, this is a, hey, look, this is a planning exercise. There's always going to be exceptions.
Yeah. Well, Ken, thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge. Where can people find you to network and learn more about what you do?
Sure. So after the series of occurrences, uh, um, I ended up taking the consulting, data and consulting business that Teraline had back from Map Anything and Salesforce, and with one of my colleagues started a company called Location Analytics. We focus on um, territory design, sizing, response curve analysis, everything around Salesforce effectiveness consulting type things. We do have a reseller agreement in place with eSpatial to be able to resell that if people want to do it, and we leverage that for our realignment projects. It's an interesting space. When we did the research years and years ago, I finally got, the Gartner and Forrester analysts to agree that it was a space. And then the first time they sized it, it was kind of interesting because the software size of the market was really, really small compared to the consulting side. Big companies like ZS Associates and others, and then everybody who's ever left ZS Associates that started a consultancy that looks like ours now, that does realignment projects for other people, because major realignments are often only done once or twice a year. It is something that can be outsourced. Obviously, I'm a software guy. I do think people can get value out of these solutions on a year-round basis, but I fully understand a company with limited resources saying, it's once a year. You do it for me. I don't want to learn anything. I'll help in the process. So we have this small consultancy that we've had going since our acquisition 5 years ago. And uh, we are based in New York and Virginia, and we can be found online. And after 5 years, I launched a website because I kind of like a cobbler's kid and marketing guy who never launched my own website.
I know how that goes. Well,
Yeah.
Ken, thank you again. And I'm sure we'll see you around the community.
All right. Greatly appreciated. Have a great afternoon. Thank
You
you.
too.